Very good. Well, I would like to welcome you all. Today is Wednesday, January 17th. To the best of my knowledge, this is the C4 Metro Subcommittee. I want to welcome my co-chair, Commissioner Savas. Nice to see all of you staying warm, staying safe, being at home. Hopefully you've got some coffee and you're ready to face the day. And so before we kick anything off, any comments for the good of the order? Anybody have anything going on? Mayor Buck, life is good in Lake Oswego?
Well, I wouldn't say that. We're surviving for the most part.
Fair enough. Well, that'll be a good way to start off. Looks like I see everybody here. We all know each other. This is a pretty normal group. So why don't we just get ourselves right into our TPAC update? I know we've got some of our fine county folks will jump over and present to us. And so we'll start with that. Ms. Beard, good morning. And Ms. Lorenzini. Excellent.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you here this morning. And so today we're going to give kind of a quick overview of what went on at TPAC earlier this month. And as you know, the TPAC notes are included within your packet. And I have to say this each time, but Jamie Lorenzini is the primary author, and she does an absolutely fantastic job conveying the information that goes forward. So, I am just going to give a high-level overview of what we talked about, and Jamie can kind of provide some additional details, but really everything is within that memo. And similar to what's going on at JPAC, it was a fairly light meeting. There was more information rather than actual decisions. And the primary topic that we talked about, so there is just as usual, the MTIP amendments that we approved. And then the largest presentation was around Forward Together, which is, and actually it's Forward Together 2.0, which is TriMet's kind of branding of the project that they will be doing related to looking at the future of service enhancement and ultimately updating their service enhancement plans. And then actually later today, as a part of this meeting, you'll be hearing about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, both the project that Metro is facilitating right now, as well as kind of upcoming opportunities. So I'm going to leave it at that. So Jamie, do you want to fill in any additional details or highlight things that you may have highlighted in the memo?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Karen. So with regard to Ford Together 2.0, it may be helpful context to talk a little bit about Ford Together 1.0. And Ford Together 1.0 is a fiscally constrained vision for restoring transit service that was cut during the COVID pandemic and increasing service by about 10% using funds provided by the STIF, the Statewide Transportation Investment Fund. The vision for Ford Together 1.0 is completed. Implementation will be rolling out over the next few years. There are some nuances with that are addressed in the memo, but jumping forward to Ford Together 2.0, this 2.0 process builds on the prior work completed to create a fiscally unconstrained vision for TriMet service and how TriMet will increase ridership consistent with our RTP, Regional Transportation Plan. So in the near future, TriMet will be hosting design workshops with jurisdiction staff, and a draft future transit network concept will be reviewed later this summer, A few things to be aware of. There are other planning exercises happening in the region in the near future. Things like last mile transit studies that'll be happening through, or a study happening through Metro. So it'll be interesting to see how those are tied together. Karen, is there any additional information that you think would be helpful?
I guess the one thing that I would note is that we are working with Brian and the executive committee to bring forward a kind of a deeper presentation at the full C4 meeting about both Forward Together 1.0, kind of what the status is there, as well as Forward Together 2.0. It's helpful because really transit impacts all of our county, not just the urban areas. So that's part of the reason why that kind of deeper presentation is going to be held at C4. So did I get that right, Brian? Yes. So that's what I would say as a part of the Forward Together item.
And I think the only other big thing is that eventually this Forward Together 2.0 will be replacing TriMet's service enhancement plans. So for anyone who closely tracks those as part of your own transportation system planning, it's something to keep your eye on. Thank you.
Very good. So I guess maybe a couple of questions. The first is, I know that all the money from 1.0 wasn't deployed primarily because we just didn't have drivers out there. I've got a friend who's an ex-driver, and they've dangled big financial carrots in front of him to come back, and it's just not something he's interested in. So, I guess that leads to how would, has the situation improved? What have they done to try to attract more drivers? I mean, because that's kind of seemingly the weak link in this chain currently. And then also the money that wasn't deployed in 1.0 gets put somewhere or gets sent somewhere. Should I expect a check in my mailbox at some point in the near future? Or what happens in that situation? Or are they just going to kind of roll it over and do something different with it?
So my first response is a lot of those details that you're asking about are probably more appropriate to ask at the C4 meeting when there's a TriMet representative there with regards to what they're doing, because they are facing that situation that you're talking about. But I will say also with Forward Together 1.0, the rollout was planned to occur over time. So we're still seeing the implementation occurring around Forward Together 1.0. And they're going to be rolling out. You may have seen some emails about new service and changes of service that are happening, and they'll end up beginning in, I believe it's October. But then they also have another round after that for the next fiscal year. So they're still rolling out the changes that are planned, but they are also having to make decisions on the types of service that they may not be able to move forward with because of the driver shortage. And so some of the choices, and this is my recollection, and Jamie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the choices that they're making have to do with when they would have kind of increased frequency, right? So they have a bus line, but instead of it going, every 20 minutes, it wouldn't move to the additional frequency because of their driver shortage. But they have been, and they still are planning on rolling out the new types of service. And some of the key elements here in Clackamas County is they are planning on rolling out service along I-205, not in this fiscal year, but in the next fiscal year. And they also have made changes to the Forward Together service expectation and providing some additional connection between West Lynn and Lake Oswego along Rosemont and McVeigh. And that also is a service that we will see in the next, I don't think they're rolling it out this round, but in the next fiscal year. And so those are kind of elements that are still part of Forward Together 1.0 and have yet to see the concern about limited drivers.
Very good. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I'd like to, well, some of you, I've shared this with you that in 2024, it'll be 25 years since I sat on my first transit committee. So I want to make sure I want to share. I promised a lot of people that I would be more vocal about some of the transit scenario or situation that we're in, and how somehow this paradigm needs to change. And so some of you are new, and I think it might be at least important at this point to just make sure we're, as many of us are aware of some of the concerns. And, thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Karen, for your presentation this morning. But I want to, first of all, draw attention to the HB 2017 legislation as it relates to STIF funds. The legislative intent was to provide, instead of the current funding situation where the funds for transit are essentially derived or paid for by the employer, where the employer is, that in order to address the last mile service where the people live, the actual workers live, STIF legislative intent was to provide that last mile, first mile, whichever way you want to word it, provide that. What took place, however, was, and I was elated because that would bring in a lot more money than we currently have as a result of STIF funds. But what happened was in the rulemaking, there was concern about C-Tran getting a lot of those dollars because some of the employees who paid that extra tax in HB 2017, that those dollars would go to C-Tran, go out of state. And that there was a challenge with that, and TriMet had concerns about that. However, the rest of the state or south of, let's say, the South Metro area or the South Clackamas area, didn't really, as a result of that, really didn't get there. And 75% of our population leaves the county every day to go to work from Clackamas. So they're going north. And I was excited and elated about that original legislative intent in HB 2017. Long story short, we got less money, and it doesn't have that intent of that last mile service. So I have voiced that everywhere I've been. I will continue to voice that. But can I share a screen a minute, Brian? Yeah, I just want to share.
You should be able to. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to just share something with you. This, can you see that? Okay, that is a that's a, if you look at the area there, just to get your bearing here, the bluish green is Washington County, the reddish pink is Multnomah County, and the yellow and tan is Clackamas County. And I remember in the STIF meetings, I had talked about this area here I'm circling as being, that's where all the spaghetti is. I call it all the lines and transit lines. And I don't know what Forward Together is going to change on this map, but as you can see, when we talk about the transit deserts in Clackamas County, this is a way of visualizing how severe, if you want to call it that, is. This area here that I am circling, why it might look like no one lives there, there's 250,000 people approximately in this area. So be mindful, this is not vacant lands here. This is primarily heavily populated. I don't know what's going to change this paradigm. The STIF funds could have made a bigger impact to help bring transit to us, but I go back to what we have asked for, in the committees that I sat on since 25 years ago, was more shuttles to get people to the lines because of our topography, because of our natural barriers, geographic, the rivers, crossings, bridges, lack thereof. So I don't know how we tackle this going forward, but it's kind of good to hear that maybe a transit line will be on I-205, but we really need to make a difference and impact is more of a complete system that has some of the intensity and grid structure, than just having a single line. A single line is not going to cut it. So I will stop sharing. Councilor Lewis and I have talked a little bit over the periods of time about what a transit system would look like along the 205 corridor, mainly in light of the discussion around tolling and RMPP and all this other stuff. But I just want to put that out there that I really think it really begs a greater discussion, and I don't know what the 2025 legislative session will look into or address, but this is one that I think we need to be mindful of going forward. So while I'm kind of hopeful that the Forward Together will bring improvements, we're also aware that it's going to take away some lines, or has taken away some lines that people have relied on. So people live where they live, or buy a home where they buy a home, and got accustomed and accommodated to the transit lines. And when you take something away, I can just tell you that the people on Oatfield Road, where I live, were very upset when the frequency was dropped significantly. So they, it's just a disappointment. It discourages ridership in the long run, as opposed to encourages ridership in some areas. That said, I'll stop there.
Very good, thank you. I mean, I think that makes sense. And all of this is within the context of future land use decisions, with transportation decisions, financing decisions, and how they will impact individuals and their habits and their needs. And so, it seems like it needs to be you can't really make the decisions in a vacuum. It's got to be done within the broader context. So it'll be interesting to see how all these pieces kind of fit together, including things like last mile and all of that. So let's see. I think according to my list of people, Councilor Barry, you are next on the list.
I'll just make it quick because I see a bunch of other hands, but I thought that map was awesome. I'm so glad that you posted it and shared it with us. Other people, I'm new to the committee, so other people probably know about that map, but I think we need to post that often. And if you could add that there's like a little note that there's 250,000 people in that population area for the county for Clackamas, that would be really good. Visuals are important. So thank you.
Very good. Excellent comment. Councilor Stavanger.
Morning, everyone. So I just wanted to comment on the map as well. I think it's helpful to see where the service lines exist, but another added layer that is helpful in this conversation would be the frequency of those lines. So I think if we're able to employ some resources of our GIS teams and be able to show not only where those lines exist and the population concentrations that they serve, but how often those populations receive the service, that would be very helpful.
It's an excellent comment. I could certainly see a graphic that uses, green, red, yellow colored lines for 30-minute cycles, 15-minute cycles. And I think that would be very interesting to see how all that lays out. Ms. Lorenzini, you are next. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off? I apologize.
I just wanted to say it's even easier than that. The information that the GIS team has is already coded by frequency. So all they need to do is just click that layer on and it denotes it on the map. So it should be a pretty fast turnaround.
Excellent. Thank you for the comment.
Yeah, I want to quick jump in and address some of Commissioner Savas's comments. I think it would be helpful, and this is discussed further in the TPAC update, to ground our strategy and our approach in TriMet's language, or what's driving them in this process. The purpose behind Ford Together 2.0 is to create an aspirational vision, and this will become a tool for them to seek additional operating funding. The big kicker here is Ford Together 2.0 is fiscally unconstrained. So if money's not on the table, this may be an excellent opportunity for this group to really press TriMet on how this aspirational vision will support a variety of transit uses and types, recognizing that traditional long buses may not be the best solution for every context. So when you talk about Commissioner Savas, you've brought up the idea of jitneys in the past, or local circulators. How could this process be a springboard for those non-traditional transit types? And additionally, if a portion of Ford Together 1.0 dollars are being repurposed for non-operational things, how does our community leverage that in the most advantageous way possible to put Clackamas County in the best light?
Very good. Excellent comments. Councilor Lewis, you are next up.
Sure, thanks. I believe I've heard a lot of support for the new 153 through West Lynn. And I think that the Forward Together mission was both to be a process but also a product. So while I'm happy that there's community support for the 153, and I'm happy that with the 154 going away, not only is there the 153, there's also the 34, the 70 something. They've done a really nice job of mapping out what service will replace where there has been 154 service shifted. I think that the Forward Together promise was also about a process, and I'm less happy about how the process went here in Clackamas County. While there was tons of tabling and engagement in other parts of the region, I didn't see that down here. So that's something that if Forward Together 2.0 really is going to be more of a process because the product isn't fiscally constrained, I'm gonna lean really hard on them to run a better process. At the very most local scale. It's not enough to check the Clackamas box. They're going to need to go locality by locality and almost neighborhood by neighborhood in order to figure out how to do engagement.
Very good. Good comments. Commissioner Savas, you are next up.
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments that you all made with regard to the map. And thank you to our Public and Government Affairs for, they didn't use GIS to create this map. They had to use some, some other skills and everything. So I really appreciate the map. I have a request or suggestion, and at least at this point, that our GIS people get involved and maybe do overlays to this map to, number one, show where the population is, number one, maybe possibly even an overlay that shows topography, possibly. So all your ideas are good. And I think the one comment with regard to the frequency, I think we can either color those lines or show them either thinner or wider or whatnot. But it's going to take some effort on our part, and I just need to make sure we have the resources and the authority. I'm a commissioner. I don't get everything I wish, but I can make that suggestion to the administrator or to our staff, and I'll try to do that again today. But this map is definitely, those visuals are powerful. But my point about this is that 25 years of this incremental changes, adjustments is that paradigm isn't working. I come to you with 25 years of frustration saying we need a paradigm change in the way transit is addressed and funded. And I'd be remiss if I did not say that is what's led to a lot of our transit agencies. So you look at the great work that's taking place in Wilsonville with SMART, and CAT in Canby, Sandy, Molalla, South Molalla, the work that we're doing up the mountain with the Mount Hood Express. We're doing a lot of things on our own because that was the only way we could get there from here. And I want to keep our partners, TriMet partners. Certainly that's important. But there is a pattern, not just in transit, but there is a pattern where we don't get as significant an investment. And lastly, I want to say one other thing is that you might hear me push back a little bit from time to time on improving or putting substantial resources into improving an existing line, whether it's high capacity transit and all that. And I think those are great ideas, right? However, it pains me to know that there's a potential to improve high capacity transit on McLaughlin Boulevard where I live. I mean, there's a benefit for my local neighborhood, but it pains me that areas that have nothing still have nothing. And I think that inequity just screams at me because I'm a county commissioner that represents every inch of the county. And when I know populations that are out there that are severely underserved or no service at all, that's the issue that I face internally. I struggle with that, but I just want to make that comment. We'll do our best to get that map out there in a GIS format. And I'll do my best today to advocate again for that based on your interest today. Thank you.
Very good. All excellent comments. Okay, before we put a pin in this one, any other thoughts or comments from the group? All right, Ms. Burig, Ms. Lorenzini, thank you so much for joining us today. Very good information as always. I think next up we've got Elliot Rose with the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. Mr. Rose, good morning.
Good morning.
Always good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Entertain us today.
I'll do my best. That may be overwhelming rather than entertaining this, but before I launch into this, I was trying to find the chat. I love that conversation about transit maps. I just want to remind folks that the regional transportation plan that Metro adopted has some maps showing frequent and regular service across the region. Figures 4.3 and 4.25. If you're taking notes, I'll follow up with Karen after the meeting too. But on to the topic of the day. I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right. And make sure we're going full screen here. Here we go. Brian, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? You're my Zooms. Thank you. All right. So thanks, C4 Metro Subcommittee, for having me today. I'm here to talk about the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. This is a new source of funding for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from EPA. And it's really important for the region because coming out of the regional transportation plan, which many of us were involved in, one of the frequent takeaways we heard from that process was we need more resources in the region, and particularly more resources to fight the threat of climate change. And so this grant provides an opportunity to pursue some of those resources, and that's really exciting for the region. So I'm going to be using the acronym CPRG to refer to these climate pollution reduction grants pretty consistently. I'll try to keep the acronyms light as I go, but there's a lot of them in this plan. So there's two grants as part of the CPRG program. I'm going to talk about both of them. The first I'm going to talk about, there's a planning grant and an implementation grant. So I'm going to talk about the planning grants first. These planning grants are non-competitive four-year grants that funded states and metropolitan areas to create plans and identify strategies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, are ready to be implemented, and are aligned with federal and state climate funding sources, including the CPRG implementation grants that I'll get to in a minute. Right off the bat, I just want to note a couple things that make this different from the type of metro business that I'm often here discussing with groups like C4. The first, the geography for this is the entire metro statistical area. That includes 7 counties. They're listed at the bottom of the screen. It's bigger than the traditional metro geography, and it includes our partners across the river in Clark and Skamania counties who've been working with our sister agency, RTC, to coordinate. Second is that this is not just a transportation and land use plan. And I love those issues, and transportation and land use are a big part of this plan, but this is also a plan about reducing the energy that buildings use and about reducing the energy that the waste systems use. So it's really big in scope. If it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, it's relevant. So it's broader in scope than the work I and other Metro staff often come to you to discuss. The third thing that's different is that it's really implementation driven. You see these words that can be readily implemented and are aligned with these various funding sources. And that means that the planning process works pretty differently for some of this work than what we're normally accustomed to. I say we have really great vision and values for this region that I think we have a lot of agreement around. And a lot of the planning processes, we start from that vision and values, collect some data and analyze it that helps direct us to the key challenges, do some more analysis and outreach to identify the solutions, figure out which things we want to move forward with implementing, and finally figure out which of those there are resources to implement. It's kind of this narrowing down process where we start with big picture values and ideas and get to the specific projects. These planning grants, because they're so aligned, they're all about teeing up projects to apply for implementation funding. That process is kind of reversed, and especially because we have a pretty short time to deliver these plans. We're often starting with the actions and then doing data and analysis to figure out which ones best align with the criteria. The process we have that EPA has given us doesn't leave a lot of room right now up front in the process for like this kind of blue sky visioning that is often, and inclusive data and outreach is often a part of the planning that we all like to do at Metro and other agencies in the region. So the main part of the challenge of this grant is because it's the big geography and, you know, very broad subject matter. We don't have a table that we can just kind of plug this into. So in addition to me talking to a lot of our regularly standing regional tables about this, we've created a group called the Climate Partners Forum to steer this grant. This is a self-nominated group. It's open to anyone. If you you can join it if you haven't been tracking it. Many of your agencies are involved in it, and these forum members review deliverables and provide feedback and key points to help make sure that the plan represents the best of the work on climate within the region. They're typically a lead climate staff in their organization. That means they have really diverse expertise, because in some organizations are all about the buildings and some are all about the transportation. And so we have a really diverse group of subject matter experts in here. And we've created the flexibility for people to leave or join the forum at any time, because what we're seeing is often, you know, people like, oh, hey, we're talking a lot about X here, and I have someone in my organization that's an expert on that. Can I bring them to this meeting so they can weigh in? And we absolutely encourage that and allow that. So here's who's been involved in this group so far. I'll just leave. I'm not going to read out all these agencies, but you'll have a copy of my slides with you. If you see your agency's name on this and you weren't aware of this and you want to know who's representing you, feel free to get in touch. My email address is at the end of the presentation. If you're not represented on this group and you want to be engaged, again, feel free to get in touch. I'll let you know when the next meeting is. The invites are open. So the CPRG planning grants involve 2 rounds of planning, each with a round of implementation funding attached. And I'm showing that in the simple timeline. These arrows are the main planning deliverables, and the green blobs are the implementation or the implementation finance attached to each plan. So we're here in the first planning phase of the grant. We received this grant in September. So we have a total of 6 months to create this first deliverable, which should say priority climate action cap or climate action plan rather than preliminary cap. I'm sorry about that. I messed that up. And then so this current plan we're working on, the priority climate action plan, is due March 1st. It's coming up really soon, and it's been a very rapid process. And that's the reason it's due March 1st is because EPA is issuing a round of follow-up implementation grants, and applications for those are due April 1st. And the plan and the implementation grants are related in a way that I'll discuss in a little minute. So the timeline is really driven for this first round is driven by the fact that EPA has some money to spend on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they're trying to get it out the door quickly. Then after this quick turnaround plan that's focused on identifying our most shovel-ready actions for this first round of implementation funds, we get a bit of a breather and get to step back and produce that bigger picture, more comprehensive plan, the comprehensive climate action plan that focuses more broadly on what our greenhouse gas opportunities are, including those that, you know, might have looked like good ideas during the first phase, but for whatever reason just weren't aligned with this first round of implementation grants that we were targeting. EPA has told us that there will be other federal climate implementation funds attached to these comprehensive climate action plans, but they haven't released the details of that yet. That's why that second green blob is a little fuzzy. Okay. So since these grants are since the planning for the first round, this planning grant and the implementation grants are really closely related, I want to talk about the implementation grants. Important though to say right off the bat that Metro has a planning grant. Metro does not, and Metro is leading the planning grant. Metro does not need to lead the implementation grants. Any agency in the region can apply for an implementation grant as long as they're doing it for an action that's included in this plan that Metro is currently in the process of creating, that's supposed to identify the best, most shovel-ready actions that the region has available to move forward with. So some other details for these grants. They're competitive grants, unlike the planning grants, which were non-competitive. There's $4.3 billion available nationwide. If you're wondering how much our region stands to gain from that nationwide pot, one simple way of doing the math is to divide that by 30 states and split it between a state and regional grantee for each state. I get about $25 to $50 million in implementation funds just when I do that, assuming EPA is going to spread the funds around evenly. EPA is giving itself a lot of flexibility in terms of the number and size of grants that it awards, but it's already telegraphing that it expects most of the grants to be on the smaller side of what's available. There's no match required, which is a reason I think that this pool will be very competitive. But there is a lot of fine print that shapes what actions are really that we think are a good idea to apply for with this particular pot of funding. And I'm showing one of those pieces right there. This is a limited grant period for 5 years. And so that right there already EPA is sending signals when they lay out a grant period of 5 years of what types of projects they expect to see apply. And one of the implications of that, since we just had a conversation about the need for transit service in various parts of the region, is that projects with ongoing costs beyond the life of 5 years are probably not good candidates for these grants. Because if we got a grant to start up new transit service, then we'd be faced with a funding cliff once the grant was up, and that service might go away. And we've learned that that's never a good footing to be on when applying for grants. So, if you want to know more about this, there's a lot more details available, or there is a notice of funding opportunity where the federal government describes these implementation grants in detail. And you want to dig into that fine print if you're thinking about a project idea. That's the next step, is to kind of line it up against the details of the plan and the details of this project, of this funding pool. So this is just kind of showing a different way of looking at the relationship between this priority climate action plan and the implementation grants. The plan's going to identify, a group of actions that look like they perform well with respect to the evaluation criteria that EPA has laid out for these grants. And those include having a solid work plan and budget, producing demonstrable greenhouse gas reductions, particularly in the 5-year time frame, and benefiting equity. And so the plan will give us a bucket of potential actions, and then we expect partner agencies, partner agencies are doing this now, trying to put together implementation grant applications to figure out which of the actions that are contained within the plan they want to apply for, and where within the region they want to put those investments. So I mentioned this briefly. Metro's not the only one doing these plans. This map shows all of the different grantees across the nation who receive these planning grants. Red dots for the metro areas, and yellow for the states that took planning grants. And I think what I want to draw your attention to here is the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, and the affiliated tribe of Northwest Indians all have the same planning grant that Metro does. And for Clackamas County, you're in the state of Oregon. So you can apply, not just if Clackamas County wanted to apply, Clackamas County can apply to implement the actions that are either in Metro's plan or in the state of Oregon's plan. And that's really important to emphasize. If you want, again, if you're looking at this, I regularly recommend you look at both plans, because the state and Metro, we've been coordinating heavily. This is a big lift. So we've been each trying to focus the plans on the areas where we have the most pre-existing work and the most authority. So if you're looking for instance, actions that cover rural areas and agriculture, you're going to want to look to the state plan first, because we're a metro area. It's mostly urbanized and it's mostly focused on urban. We talk with the state. It's like, yes, it makes more sense. We have some ag areas within the metro area, but the state has more. It makes more sense for the state to do the planning for those for agricultural lands because there's just so much more of them in the state of Oregon. So we've really been, as I mentioned, this plan has been heavily driven by the implementation grant criteria. And here's some of where those criteria direct us. We need to really identify projects that are focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That may seem a little bit circular, but when I look at different climate plans in the region, there's a lot of actions in there about adaptation and resilience, or about environmental justice. It's not necessarily about how we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but about make sure that everyone benefits from that. Those things are not eligible for one of these implementation grants. A project has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how much greenhouse gas emissions it reduces is a key factor. I mentioned that you have to be able to demonstrate greenhouse gas emissions within 5 years. So, long-term planning, long-term land use changes, like we know that changing land use does really benefit greenhouse gas emissions, but it takes longer than 5 years in many cases. And so, that's telling us that maybe some of those longer term actions are not the best candidate for this plan and these implementation grants. And then, really because this is all coming together so quickly and we have 6 months, EPA isn't making this explicit, but when we circled together the partners who have done a lot of climate work in the region, we said, hey, we should start from existing climate action plans in the region. And those are our source material for developing this first plan. Because there's such a need, this implementation app grant is asking for really fully baked ideas. And we think that means that ideas that have some planning, some outreach behind them, that have showed up in a climate action plan or are showing up in a climate action plan under development are going to have a much easier time demonstrating to EPA that they have a competitive work plan and budget. Lastly, I should say that, implementation grants applications have to be led by public agencies. There are a lot of other great things we could be doing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that might be led by utilities or might be led by community groups or nonprofits. Those are all great ideas, but they're just not eligible for this particular grant funding stream, and they're not where we're focusing because EPA has been very explicit that agencies need to be the ones to apply for these implementation grants. So this is a really complicated document, diagram of this crazy process we've been on in the past 5 months to do all this work that EPA has asked us to do to create this plan and get it all done by March. We've had the orange blocks are the Climate Partners Forum meetings, that stakeholder group that I mentioned. So we've had 2 conversations so far with that group to build the menu of implementation actions from the existing plans that are out there, and then to screen them with respect to EPA's criteria. At our last meeting, we recommended I would say we, that means Metro staff and our consultant team, recommended a group of strategies that should be included in the PCAP. And now we're doing a lot of outreach and analysis to refine that list of strategies, make sure that we're describing all of the ideas that we want to see eligible for implementation grants as well and in a positive light, and presenting their full importance to the region as best we can to tee them up to write competitive applications. And also doing a lot of the outreach and analysis to button up the different aspects of this plan that are required by EPA so that we can have a valid plan that gets all these actions in it fully eligible to apply. So this is all coming together quickly. We're going to have on the 23rd is our next Climate Partners Forum meeting, and we're going to be presenting. We probably won't have a full draft PCAP document at this point, but we will be presenting, the full set of information that EPA is requesting about all of the different strategies in the plan, including costs, greenhouse gas emissions, and other co-benefits that EPA is looking for projects to achieve. Then we're going to be making the rounds of that plan before we plot to get feedback before we finalize it and leave a month to apply for implementation grants. So we're learning a lot through this grant about what projects are really going to move forward and where we think we can find more resources through this program and others to advance our work on climate in the region. I went over this first bullet already. Basically, this is a different way of saying that the implementation grant criteria are really driving this plan from behind. What we learned also is the plans in our region really vary, these climate action plans, because there's no set of requirements or standard protocol for how an agency does that. And that's making it hard for us to identify truly region-wide actions we can take on climate, because a lot of localities have looked at climate through different lenses. So this is a really valuable opportunity to start to standardize all of that work and say, hey, you know, this person looked at climate in 2012 with this through this lens, and this person looked at, or this agency looked at climate in 2017 through this lens. And they both reached the same conclusion that this action was good. Well, that probably means it's a pretty good action. We're doing some of the work to harmonize that right now, and it's really valuable, but we can also see that more is needed to really tee our region up to pursue resources in the future. The places where we see the greatest opportunities in the region in particular are transportation, residential energy efficiency, and waste management. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is and what those strategies are in just a second. No surprise here, but we have more needs than, you know, EPA probably has resources to fund, or that local agencies in our region have resources to apply for, because it takes a lot of work to submit one of these applications and manage one of these grants. So, you know, again, the constraints of the implementation grant and what it takes to apply for a federal grant are really kind of winnowing down this list of actions to what's going to move forward for the region. Lastly, our region is taking a more aggressive and different approach to equity and climate justice than EPA requires. Metro's plans identify equity focus areas that we use to target resources toward equity. Other counties and cities do the same, where they come up with matrices and do data analysis to try to benefit the people who are most disadvantaged and most need help within their jurisdictions. None of that work matters in front of EPA. We're forced to use the federal definition of disadvantaged communities, and there's like a master map for that. So that's been something, because our region really, and equity is a really important issue in the region, but we've had to be careful to make sure that when we talk about equity under this grant program, we're talking about it in federal terms, not in our local terms, because those are the terms we're ultimately required to use. Okay, so these are the screening factors that we use to look at the different, our team reviewed over 700 individual actions from the different climate action plans in the region. I think they covered around 13 to 17 of those documents, because there's a couple things that are kind of like a climate action plan, but not quite. They came up with 700 different actions. They screened all these actions according to these criteria, which match the ones that EPA is asking for in the implementation grant evaluations. Is the project ready to go? Is it gonna produce significant greenhouse gas emissions in 5 years? Do local agencies have the authority to really get started on leading this today? Is this something that can scale up to benefit multiple cities or even counties or the entire region? And then what co-benefits does it have, especially with respect to equity? I'm happy to share a memo with the full results of this stuff, but for now, I'm just going to show the top strategies that popped out. These are divided across 2 slides. So this is the first slide showing the actions that screen the most highly. No surprise to anyone who's been sitting around, I think, the RTP table. There's a lot of stuff about transit, which is, you know, both improving access to stations, making vehicles moving quicker through traffic, and where matching funds are available, increasing service. But then, you know, you get down to the fourth the fourth entry on the list, and suddenly this is looking very different from what at least I normally get to talk about at the Metro tables. I'm talking about weatherizing and providing more efficient appliances, particularly heating systems in in homes. And there's, you know, a lot of counties, including Clackamas, I believe, run programs to do this sort of thing that might be able to be scaled up through this grant. You know, completing key gaps in the active transportation network is also pretty universal need called out in these climate action plans. Expanding regional safe routes to school programs really feels like just kind of part of that to me as I look into it closer. And then residential composting was another action that screened highly in the region. You know, we have a bit of a competitive edge there because through Metro, we have centralized waste management. We can do things as a region that other regions can't. So the second set of actions, these screened well, but not quite as highly, were things like using intelligent transportation systems to manage traffic, expanding the use of parking pricing, bulk purchasing renewable energy for a community, potentially using a tariff to fund that. And then, you know, a couple other additional items related to residential composting, bus electrification, and kind of the education and outreach we do around food waste and recovery. So this is the initial list of strategies that we came up with. Not all of these are moving forward for implementation grants. As far as I'm aware, I've been trying to track what's coming forward in the region. And, you know, generally, these are competitive grants. So this plan is saying that all 15 of these things are good ideas for the region. They're places where we have momentum and places where we think we can demonstrate some significant short-term greenhouse gas emissions. But as people are thinking about applying off of this, they're looking at this grant pool saying, this is going to be really competitive. And if I'm going to put in the effort to apply, I want to apply for one of the top ideas. So I would say that most of the applications that we're seeing focus on this slide here. So I already covered what we're doing here. We're finishing up the climate action plan through a lot of outreach and analysis in this month. And I'm also just trying to coordinate with everyone who I hear about submitting an implementation grant application. Metro can't tell anybody to apply for something or you know, not to apply for an action as long as it's in the plan that we created and eligible according to EPA's criteria. But we try to track applications and give folks advice so that, you know, based on what we learned through this plan, so that collectively the region can put its best foot forward when applying for these implementation grants and maximize our odds of bringing home the resources that we need to work on this important issue. So we've got a lot of engagement coming up. Mainly, I just want folks to know that we're engaging with, you know, the regional committees like C4 and the Metro tables, as well as a lot of other non-government partners, and coordinating with our state level partners because we need to be mindful of what their plan looks like and what applications are moving forward from the state to submit competitive applications as a region and to produce the plan that EPA is asking for. And then we also need to you know, even though local agencies need to lead these grants, these last three groups on the list have critical input and can provide really important partnerships on projects. And we want to make sure they're aware of the projects moving forward and have the opportunity to step up and partner and support with actions that they feel are important. So I've really zeroed us down to the short term because we have an incredibly short amount of time to produce this plan, and there's implementation dollars attached, and there's a lot of work for us to do between now and March, April. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that after we produce this short-term plan, we do get another bite at this apple to produce a comprehensive climate action plan. And there are more resources attached to that, although we're learning more about what they look like. So, you know, if you had a really great idea that you were interested in, you know, seeking funding for, and you think would reduce emissions, it didn't show up on that list of actions that I showed, That just means it might not be a great candidate for this particular round of implementation grants we have facing it. But the things that don't move forward to get applied for under this current plan, I expect them to be first on the list and very high priorities when we get into this next phase, because we've learned that they're good ideas and they're just not well calibrated for this particular set of implementation grants. So we need to go find other sources of implementation funding that can support those. And that's what the next round of the plan is about. I'm going to drop us out of presentation and put these questions in the chat. But really, you know, I'm interested in folks' feedback on this plan, but really my number one thing right now, since this is moving so fast, and I know, you know, we've kind of been building this plan as we go, I just really want to make sure that everyone's in on this process and it feels well informed about it, knows how they can engage. So thanks for giving me the time today.
Very good. Lots of very good information. Appreciate that. Commissioner Savas. Oh, and you're muted. There we go.
Thank you, Elliot, for your presentation. And you've been around for a while, so you've heard me speak from time to time about metrics and how we do that. And what was the name of your group again? The
Climate Partners Forum.
Climate Partners Forum. Thank you. I won't say a concern, for at least let's just call it that for now. And I really appreciate the work. I know all the work's well intended. I think that we, you know, most of us probably here today, and a lot of people are very mindful of the impacts of climate change and the impacts of the CO2 contributions and how we fix that. You know, my background, some of you may not know, but my background since I was a teenager in California was in air quality, automotive emissions. California has and still is, I think, on the cutting edge of that world in development and so forth. So I worked for a company called Automotive Environmental Systems Incorporated. It was a laboratory that tested all these theoretical ideas and cars and, you know, so forth. And we had just literally laboratory, high quality grade testing and theory, and to prove what worked, what didn't work under all different driving scenarios and stop, go, speeds, everything else. So all to say that carrying that forward in my life, I've been following that and practice that. And locally here in Clackamas County, people really didn't know that, but part of my business was I would take vehicles, usually the ones I owned, and I would convert them to rolling laboratories full of data acquisition stuff, so I could tell people what worked, what didn't work, and develop product accordingly. So that's what financially motivated me to do that. So, you know, Elliot, you've heard me mention in past, how do we get metrics more in the forefront of some of these theories and ideas? And, you know, I've heard, you know, staff say from time to time that, you know, because we have this theory, or in these ideal circumstances, it's been shown that we can reduce climate CO2 emissions by doing X. If we do X, therefore we're accomplishing our goals, you know, and really it's not, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. I'm going to share my screen again, only because I just want to share with you that there's conflicts, I think, and there's been a lack of recognition. I don't know how we inform that group with more science-oriented people, but this technology or understanding that congestion actually contributes to CO2 production and actually makes things worse. And traffic flow, smooth flow, whether it's on local streets or whether it's on highways, is actually the most effective way to reduce CO2. Google recently got involved with this, and they did a project in Seattle, and I'm going to share my screen about this here as an example. You can all see that? No? Whoops. Where are we at? Here we go. You all see that? There we go. Okay, great. So I'm not going to play the video, but it's Google's Project Greenlight, and basically what it they're using AI and all this laboratory stuff to basically establish what I'm trying to convey to you all. And that is that in essence, when a vehicle stops, it produces a certain amount of emissions. When it slows down, it produces a different type of emission. If you just break down the composition of tailpipe emissions, when you accelerate, it produces the most amount of emissions, harmful emissions. So that you have the CO2 element, and you also have other toxics that are part of that chemical breakdown out of the exhaust. So CO2 is the hardest to measure, and it's a global issue. It's not a local issue, whereas the toxics, whether it's hydrocarbons or nitrogen oxide, or it is CO, or some other carbon elements other than CO2, those have local impacts to health, more so than CO2 output. But sometimes they're together, meaning that the impacts are shared, whether it's local and climate, and sometimes they are not. But I'm going to stop sharing only to draw your attention to that whole thing. This AI technology, improving traffic flow, does reduce carbon emissions. So in practicality, I know that smart cities are based on, when you see parking pricing or congestion pricing or so forth, if it doesn't lead to a real CO2 reduction in the long run, it might be beneficial for a locality to enjoy the benefits maybe, but globally, the net result is we're making things worse globally, but maybe in this locale, whether it's, a certain part of a city or whatnot, that we're doing these wonderful things, but it comes at the expense of a greater output elsewhere. So there's consequences, there's trade-offs, that we typically have. But I'm hoping, Elliot, that your group, or we can find a way to inform your group about metrics and realities of some of these designs, and somehow bring that to locally, to the metro area, and policy development into how did that work? We did this here, or that city did it here. How's it really working? And it doesn't really have the overall benefit globally and locally. They're two different scenarios. No one can argue that running a whole bunch of school buses that are diesel powered, or TriMet buses that are diesel powered, or your trash collection, garbage collection locally that are diesel powered, or even if they're powered by natural gas or all these other things, that there's still that local pollution that has an issue. But there's, again, that stop go is the worst thing that contributes to the greatest amount of CO2 contribution, bar none, is stop go. So wherever we can do that. So those who say, and some of our lawmakers, those who say that, the more congested the freeway is, that'll then entice people to, not take their car and take transit. In Clackamas County, we don't have much transit. So there's an example where, in theory, you have all these theoretical ideas, but in practice, you have no means to really accomplish the net goal, which is CO2 reduction. So a lot said, but I would love to, I don't have the time to be part of your group, but I'm hoping there's a way to find a way we can actually look at these metrics and bring in that actual lived experience and science into that. And if I had my wish, if I could wave a wand, I would say that maybe all of our land use planners, because it is land use and transportation planning, should maybe have a field day, or with a whole bunch of engineers who do what I've done for a living, and in practice, to actually better inform how we go forward and bring metrics to the table. Thank you. Said a lot. Sorry.
Very good. Thank you. Counselor Pratt, you're next up.
Hi, Elliot. I'm wondering on the strategies. You mentioned this is like 5-year funding, so it's limited, so we don't want it for ongoing operations. But then the first strategy is to implement high capacity transit. So how is that done without being an ongoing cost?
Excellent question. So this is a little bit, this one, and there are a couple others like this, are in the plan for optics and as a way to communicate the importance of other strategies. I would not advise anyone to apply for money to increase transit service in the region. But when other agencies are looking at the other transit strategies that I highlighted, where can we provide access and how can we streamline streets to make it easier for people to access, board vehicles, and for those vehicles to move through traffic? They're often trying to do that in a way that builds off of, that supports outside investments in increasing service that don't come through this grant plan, but might be the subject of a change due to something like Forward Together that we just discussed. So, you know, that's a really great question. I don't think anyone's going to apply to, I hope no one applies to increase transit service off this grant, because I don't think they get funded if they did. But I do want people who are applying, agencies that are applying for other transit-related strategies, to be able to acknowledge that increasing transit service is a key greenhouse gas strategy, and we're coordinating with another investment in doing that. That helps them tell their story to apply for their projects. That's my hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And then I have, I wondered on the next one, you're talking about redesigning streets to reduce delays for transit, and it says enhance transit and transit priority corridors. Can you tell me what that means? Because I'm in so many meetings where we discuss safety of our transportation system, and the idea is to slow traffic. So I just wondered what the enhanced transit and transit priority corridors is defined as.
Sure, yeah. It's dedicated steps to move transit more quickly through traffic without increasing the speed of other vehicles to make it dangerous. So I mean, the number one example I can give is like transit signal priority, where the bus has an effective remote control that can change the signal to a green light, and that allows it to hit all the green lights down the stretch, even as they're timed regularly for the cars. A bus boarding platform that, you know, comes out into traffic so the bus didn't pull over. Sometimes that's a design treatment that makes sense. So there's a lot of things that we try to do to streamline just transit without making the vehicular traffic, other vehicles move faster.
So like bus on shoulder would be an example.
That's it, yeah.
Okay. And then my last little comment here is just way down the list is expand anaerobic digestion capacity.
Yeah.
If that could be done closer to the Portland metro area and we're not transporting that so far, I think that would be huge in this region. Anyway, thank you.
Very, very good comments. Councillor Lewis, you're next up.
Sure. Thank you so much, Elliot. This is really exciting and great work. And I just want to thank you and the team for bringing together so many agencies. And I think it's important to think back to the time before we were all in coordination with our climate action plans. And I know we have different levels of maturity across the region with climate action plans, but those being the starting point, I think is an important grounding place. My question is around the flexibility of these dollars for public-private partnerships, because I know you mentioned that you have to have an agency at the lead. But if we're going to be able to do investments, say in solid waste, some of that is in the space where agencies are in the lead, but they work with private facilities. So what's the opportunity to apply in cooperation with a private entity?
So there, you know, one pathway is that, you know, a grantee could, say for energy efficiency, it's a good example because Energy Trust Oregon is just such a prominent program deliverer, and they're on my mind. You know, a lot of the application where we're moving forward, scale up stuff people are already doing, right? And a lot of those programs have some sort of partnership with Energy Trust and or some other community organization to help target these incentives to make your home more efficient toward low-income homeowners. And so one model would be that those entities could apply alongside, as come in as part, they wouldn't be able to lead the application, but the application would specify their roles, specify the amount of resources they receive. And, there's probably some fine print I would want to read to make sure that I was given good advice on how exactly that partnership could be reflected, but you can come with a partnership as part of an application, or an agency could say, hey, we'll contract this out, we'll bid this out, which is always a good way to engage the private sector. And you have to, as long as you follow EPA's procurement requirements, that's another way to kind of engage private support on a project.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Burek, you're up.
Hi, so I just thought I would offer and share a few things that I have learned about the program. So I have sat on the Community Partners Forum to learn more about what's going on and to provide information. And so internally, I've also been trying to coordinate and understand about the applications that might be moving forward, because a lot of this really is, and Elliot did a great job of explaining, around formatting something that really supports funding opportunities. And so what I've heard is that for kind of Clackamas County, that we've been looking at partnerships around, kind of through our public health departments, around an application that has to do with a residential heating and cooling and wood stove exchange. That's something that Multnomah County and Washington County have been looking to lead on. Other places like Clackamas County, we're considering whether or not we should be partners in that application. One of the things that we are constrained with is staffing. So whether or not we would have both the staffing to participate and then to implement, but it is something that's being considered, right? And there's many different sectors around here that this particular funding source will end up being able to fund. Under the transportation umbrella, again, I think it's better together, we will be more competitive, kind of more broadly. I think all of the counties have articulated that and what that really rolls out to be. It's better for a joint application versus an individual application. And so here at the county, we've been just trying to keep tabs on what may be moving forward and whether or not there are opportunities for partnership. I know that TriMet is looking at various kind of options that they may have, looking really specifically at what really is going to be the most competitive and how could they look at their application as a way to build partnerships. But beyond that, I don't have many more details about individual jurisdictions within the county, whether or not they're considering applying. But overall, the way that I perceive it, and kind of at the beginning of Elliot's discussion, there's going to be potentially about 120 at most awards. That really isn't very many nationwide. Federal grants are really complicated. So working together will be really important. So I just wanted to share that with you, just so you all know what kind of discussions are happening locally.
Excellent.
Yeah,
thank you for that. I'm sorry, Elliot.
I just wanted to I had to, because I'm learning about this too. I had that weatherization program that Karen referred to from Clackamas County already up in my browser. So I dropped the link there in case the other transportation inclined folks need to catch back up on what's happening in energy efficiency.
Very good. Councillor Stevinger, we'll give you the final word of the topic.
Ooh, exciting. Well, actually, so I had a question maybe for Commissioner Savas. I'm not sure about Milwaukee's capacity to apply at this point. I'll have to talk to some folks, but the idea of swapping out wood stoves, installing maybe heat pump like systems for lower income community residents sounds appealing. But I'm acutely aware of some of the unincorporated urban pockets that adjoin our city. I'm wondering what sort of appetite there might be for some collaboration on an application with, I guess, with Clackamas County, to move forward with some weatherization options that would, kind of blend our resources, but reach out into some of those unincorporated pockets.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The first thing that popped in my mind, Rebecca, is, we have about 420,000 people in Clackamas County, and about, less than half that is our rural population. And, in weather like we currently have, I think there's concerns when there's a power outage. I think some people, for example, that rely on either, as arcane as it sounds, oil heat or wood heat or natural gas or whatever it may be. I guess in the end, those redundancies of power or energy or heat, life supporting in a sense, factor in, and they're unique and all around the county, depending on where you are and what you have and what you don't have access to. So I wanted to follow. I just got word last week. I haven't had a chance to review it. Our climate action plan. I want to see how it we'll say calibrated, but how it factored that into some of the recommendations. And then I will have a better idea of what our appetite is for some of those recommendations based on our very diverse and unique county with populations and different levels of energy. But it's no secret that we need to harden our grid the more we rely on electricity. And a heat pump is heavily dependent upon power, electrical power. And I've been waiting for more energy resiliency, whether it's storage, whether it's like these commercial, industrial, local battery storage for our utility systems, or it's hydrogen conversion storage, or whatever it may be. With the advent of solar and wind, which you need, again, that depends on is there adequate sun? What happens when at nighttime? All these things that factor into hardening and getting more resiliency in our grid. So I'm fascinated by all those things, but I can try to get a better idea of what our support is or not, or interest is in looking at some of those factors. It's complex. There's no secret that if you have an older 1950s uninsulated home somewhere in suburban or rural Clackamas County, you're probably losing a lot of power and energy, and you're probably contributing clearly, at least clearly to me, that your contribution to the CO2 output and energy waste is probably much higher. So we do have an active weatherization, but it is for primarily low income. But there's a lot of technologies coming around the corner. I'm always interested in that. And the fact that we're building new homes reduces that impact a little bit. And so long-winded answer, sorry, but I can look into that and get a better answer for you.
Okay,
Sure.
yeah, I might touch base with you offline because, when I'm thinking about the urban unincorporated areas, the type of low income affordable housing that we are seeing in some areas, adjacent to Milwaukee, are manufactured homes, mobile home parks, and the idea of the resilience in that sort of a structure is pretty tenuous. And I'm thinking not only in terms of heating, but heat pumps are also cooling. And so then that actually increases our resilience in the face of disaster, or heat domes, as we experienced just in the last couple of years. So happy to have some more conversation offline if you're open to it.
Yeah. That's where my greatest concern is. I don't think people understand how many RV or trailer parks there are in our neck of the woods, Counselor. There's a lot more than people even realize. They're kind of tucked away and people don't realize it, but we have a huge population that live in those kind of homes, and they're just not energy efficient. And most of our brownouts, or that are experienced around the country, happen in the summertime when there's a lot of heat. And I expect to see more of that in the Northwest as time goes.
Very good. Mr. Rose, quick comment?
Yeah, sorry. What I love the talk about coordination. I wanted to flag two things. One, EPA has said explicitly in the application packet, we're not going to fund two different governments to do the same thing in the same place. So coordinating with the county is great. And I don't know about Clackamas County's program, but in general, a lot of the county weatherization programs I'm aware of apply both to the cities and the unincorporated areas. So I think it gives you some of that flexibility that you're talking about. In addition, if the county doesn't, I forgot to mention this, this is so important. If the county is kind of on the fence about this idea and whether it's a good idea to go after an energy efficiency grant as the county, this is also an action in the state's plan. And the state will also be seeking EPA funding to beef up their weatherization program statewide. The folks in this room are probably always going to know what's best for Clackamas County. But if you're on the fence about, is it really worth our effort to submit this, it might be worth a coordination with the state too, just to hear more about what they're planning and think about how you might benefit from the state's program, even if Clackamas County doesn't pursue its own grant. And I'm happy to support that. Thanks.
Very good. Councilor Lewis, I will always carve out time for you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that we're outside of our normal kind of transportation and affordable housing realm, and that we may have partners that we want to pull into these conversations for coordination. There are some of the cities, even in urbanized Clackamas County, that are not part of the stakeholder table. So it might be on us to better coordinate. I just, sort of thought of, West Lynn would be good for wood stove conversion. So I think there is opportunity with the March 1 deadline. We may have to not use these formal meetings, but work amongst ourselves. And particularly because Clackamas is in that phase of adopting the climate action plan still, like it may be for the cities to rush forward with their adopted plans and the work that they're doing. So if I can help coordinate, matchmake, or even just get a professional staff table or kind of a TAC, I'm happy to use some of my time and energy to help set that table.
Excellent. Very good. We're going to move the agenda forward. Mr. Rose, thank you so much for joining us today. Very, very good, robust conversation. Next up on the list is our impact update. Mayor Buck, can you keep it under 56 seconds?
Am I giving the impact update? I'll be honest, I'm not prepared. I'm sorry. I have no idea.
Perfect. Last impact meeting was December 13th, I believe. We covered the urban growth management buildable land inventory. We are at a point now where Metro has sent the inventory of lands out within the UGB. The jurisdictions have commented. Staff included that information as part of the update going forward. And so I think that'll be coming back for city and county review in February. And then we also covered the Sherwood West area, about 1,300 acres that potentially could be added to inside the urban growth boundary as well for expansion. Looks like a pretty robust area. My only question with that, it seems very consistent with what we see on the east side, on the far side of Happy Valley as well. Transportation facilities very constrained to get out there. And so it'll be interesting to see how kind of all that comes together. That's all I've got for MPAC. Any quick comments before we transition to our legislative update and Mr. Hockaday takes us home? Brian, you're on.
All right, thank you very much. Trent is actually on the call as an attendee listening in. We didn't think he was going to be able to join because we had previously scheduled a legislative breakfast for Clackamas County, really to talk about our top two priorities, which are to complete the state's 50% match of our replacement courthouse project. That project is already well underway, on track to open on time and on budget by summer 2025. And then our number two priority, of course, is to address the bottleneck on I-205 and funding for Abernathy Bridge. But we had to cancel that breakfast, unfortunately, due to weather. So we are still just gearing up for the legislative short session. Commissioner Savas, is there anything else that you wanted to add in regards to the legislative update?
No, I do not. I think we're in the learn mode. I think we all experienced a little bit of a slowdown here in the flow of information due to the weather and the holiday and everything. So stay tuned. And I don't have anything. I think we're all apprised of the, the outcomes. Those of you there for the number 4 tolling meeting that we had in Gladstone. Don't have much more to add. We have our TAC meeting next Monday. So stay tuned for that. And the OTC meeting is 2 days following, I believe, on Wednesday. But stay tuned and just be mindful. You can always watch those. They're all taped. And more to come.
Very good. Anybody have any word on today's CCBA Legislative Summit in, where is that, Oregon City this afternoon? Has anybody heard whether that's still a go? I mean, assuming it is, but.
It's still happening. Trent
Okay.
just texted, it's still happening.
Very good. Any last thoughts, closing comments? We have a minute left, so anything for the good of the order?
Be careful out there.
Absolutely. Stay safe, stay warm. Good to see everyone. This meeting's adjourned. We'll see you all again soon.